something in specific about Friedrich Schiller and the Institute to start us off, because today, November 10th, is the birthday of Friedrich Schiller. He was born in 1759, 261 years ago. He was a poet, philosopher, historian, and a master of political intelligence. In 1984, the Schiller Institute was formed. It was originally an initiative that was intended to be taken by the U.S. State Department, but the United States State Department did not adopt it, and it was founded by Helga Sepp-LaRouche, and she will be one of the participants in today's discussion. But I want to also quote something from Friedrich Schiller, who, as an historian in particular, his History of the 30 Years' War being a pivotal classical work of history, had the following to say in the second of his aesthetical letters. He said, "Full of expectation, the eyes of the philosopher, as of the man of the world, are now fastened upon the political theater of action. We are now, as one believes, looking at the great destiny of humanity, a question which would otherwise only be answered through the blind right of the stronger, is now, as it seems, made pending before the tribunal of pure reason. And only he who is always able to place himself in the center of the whole and raise his individuality to that of the human species may regard himself as a member of that tribunal of reason." We're here today because everyone in the world actually is looking at the theater of action, which is not merely occurring around the American presidency, but around the world. A series of multiple and multiply connected crises, which converge upon the office of the presidency of the United States in particular, bring us here today. We've been involved in specific, many of us as individuals, and also in other ways, in exposing an ongoing process in the United States involving the fraud of the election. This is not an election fraud matter. It's because of the nature of what's being done. Particularly nefarious, dangerous process involving a certain kind of program being used by rogue elements of American intelligence and also British intelligence is being used to not merely attempt to steal the American election, but to, shall we say, showcase and to introduce a form of technology which would render every election in the world unreliable if it were allowed to be so used. So to start us off today, and I guess I should first introduce the entire panel, so let's just do that. We will have Kirk Wiebe, a former senior analyst with the National Security Agency, Harley Schlanger, who many people know as the person who does the daily webcast on the Rich Political Action Committee, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Black, who has been at the forefront of exposing the possibility of the role of the military in a coup against the president of the United States, Donald Trump, and Helga Sepp-LaRouche, the co-founder of the Schiller Institute. We're hoping to be joined by James Jatras, the former advisor from the United States Republican leadership, but he's not with us at the moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to start right off with Kirk Wiebe, and then he will be followed by Harley Schlanger. So Kirk?
Yes, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We are at a decision point and also a constitutional crisis in these United States. And as Helga Sepp-LaRouche and others of the LaRouche Pact have noted in the past, United States, here, now, in this moment, as we sort through the corruption that has been launched upon our elections process, this will determine where we are headed within a few short months. A president is to be sworn in on January 20th. And just so that you get an understanding of the greater picture and how this could possibly unfold. One, The first is the president's team discovers so much corruption on a scale sufficient to change the election result that you've all seen in favor of Trump. And then the states will be ordered to do everything from recounts to audits. A recount is just go back, retotal the vote, and send it in. Unfortunately, that's not good enough. It will uncover some fraud, but it will not uncover all of it. And so an audit is something more detailed. You actually have to go back to the ballot and determine if the ballot was legally cast. In the United States, most states mandate that the election totals be completed on November 3rd. In our case, because of COVID, some judges in lower courts have taken it upon themselves to extend the counting period past November 3rd. In some cases, ruling that an additional 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 days could be added. Some of those were disputed by the Trump administration and they were canceled, but in others, they were allowed to proceed. Now, what you need to understand is judges do not control the election process. The US Constitution puts that in the hands of the state legislatures. They decide on how votes are going to be, how the voting process is going to be conducted, and they set the rules. So Trump administration is going to challenge any ruling where this counting was extended beyond November 3rd, and they will likely have to go to the Supreme Court, where the belief is Trump will get a favorable ruling. Then the question is, what's the remedy? Do all votes that were postmarked after November 3rd, or that came in late and back postmarked to November 3rd, if that can be determined, will those be thrown out? And are they of such volume that it would change the election? There are other avenues that are being pursued. You may have heard of the scorecard and hammer, a computer-based, software-based method of cheating, wherein the reports that are being reported to the state level that contain the count of the vote is changed as it's being transmitted over the internet. That's not really new technology, changing things in real time as they go over the internet. That technology's been around 15 years, maybe even 20 years. So it's nothing new. It's just that the application of it against our national election process and against the American people is what's new and absolutely illegal. In any case, what I want to do before I get too into the different types of fraud, I'd like to give you just a little quick background about this hammer and scorecard. First of all, this whole cheating going on before us is not one means of cheating. There are 4 or 5 involved, and I'll talk about those a little bit more in a minute. But the one that everyone's hearing about, besides mail-in ballots and ballot stuffing, is this hammer with this activity, this illegal activity, are James Clapper, former Director of National Intelligence. He's been former CIA. He actually teamed up with John Brennan, head of CIA, who wasn't initially head of CIA in 2009, but was in the high levels of intelligence, to make a copy of the Hammer scorecard capability and use it in a clandestine, hidden way in a valid US government facility on the eastern shore of Chesapeake Bay in the state of Maryland at a location called Fort Washington, Maryland. And there is a secret compartmented facility at that location. Now, it is said to have operated there. When the whistleblower on the Hammer and scorecard came forth, his name is Dennis Montgomery. When he saw this happen and he developed this technology, he couldn't live with himself and he attempted to blow the whistle. People didn't want him to blow the whistle. People in high positions of power during the Obama administration wanted to squelch or stop Montgomery from getting his word out. And that worked for a long time. And one of the steps that they used was to put Montgomery under a gag order. And that even predates the time that Brennan and Clapper took the technology illegally to use it for illegal purposes. He was put under the State Secrets Act so that Dennis could never talk about the hardware and software capabilities he had built. So Dennis, you have to understand, is under the threat of prosecution if he violates the classification, the classified information access documents he has signed, and also the one for the State Secrets Act. People say, why didn't he come forth sooner? He was gagged. And when he finally does come forth in 2015, he goes to the FBI and gives them 47 hard drives full of evidence. Comey, James Comey, is the head of the FBI at that time, and nothing happens. Nothing happens. And so Montgomery tries to use different means to get this made known to good people, people who believe in the law, in government, but he couldn't do it. And he had to be careful about what he said because of the legal threats sitting on top of him. Well, so in an effort to break this story loose, we were contacted by a journalist up in the Evanston, Illinois area, just about 20 miles from Chicago. A wonderful lady named Mary Fanning, who puts out the American Report. She is an alt news source, but she has been very active in trying to get the truth out on this matter. She befriended Dennis Montgomery and managed to ask him to provide evidence of this capability, this threat that was out there and still operating, by the way, and it may be operating right now, even as we speak. But she wanted Dennis to provide some data that trusted people could take to Congress. And Dennis put a lot of information on a thumb drive and password protected it. And Mary asked me and Bill Binney to hand carry, drive our automobile down to Capitol Hill. It's about 70 miles from me, from my location in North Central Maryland. And so I asked my wife to come with as sort of a witness. And Bill and I and my wife, Cindy, got in a car, took the thumb drive, drove down to Capitol Hill, Sidney Powell, the great attorney for the administration, had made arrangements for us to drop this data off through the auspices of Congressman Louis Gohmert's office. So we arrived. A lot of people were gone from Congress because COVID, the whole COVID thing had already begun. This was mid-March when we went down to Capitol Hill. And so we're in with his chief of staff, a wonderful lady who makes a phone call while we're there to Devin Nunes's office and asks that they send someone down to Louis Gohmert's office to pick up this thumb drive. Why? Devin Nunes was the ranking member to the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and had people duly cleared and familiar with sensitive information. And so a representative from Nunes's office came down, sat down with us. We explained to them what we had. We couldn't explain everything because, frankly, we had never seen what was on that thumb drive. We just knew it contained information of interest to the national security of this nation. All right. So we tell that to the representative, and he takes it, he accepts it. We give him a couple of documents for additional information on other matters, but of interest. And he goes away, and we shake hands with everyone and get back in the car and go home. Now, the only way they can get that information off that thumb drive is to call Dennis Montgomery at his home. And we gave him the phone number to do that so that he would give them the password to unlock the thumb drive. 1 week goes by. I call Dennis. Have you been contacted by Congress? No. 2 weeks? No. 3 weeks? No. A month? No. 2 months? No. And my belief today, although it wasn't at the time, somebody does contact him. And I'm praying that's true. I do not know it for a fact. But when I saw Sidney Powell get on American television and talk about the hammer and the scorecard and how it corrupts an election, I put 1 and 1 or 2 and 2 together in my mind, and I'm fairly certain that she must have ended up getting in touch with Dennis Montgomery. And thank God that is so. And so let me explain to you 1 minute, very short explanation of how the hammer and this software called Scorecard works. The hammer part of this 2-part system is what opens doors on the internet. It controls switches on the internet. Everything on the internet goes through a switch, and it's routed according to the address of the data you're sending down the internet, whether it's you sending an email, a congressman sending a Word document. All data is packetized, put into little pieces of information, and they all have addresses. They're like little bugs going down the internet. And if you only open 1 or 2 pieces, you can't do that. Your system, your computer will say it's a corrupt file or there's data missing and won't know what to do with it. So all the parts of an email, all the packets of a Word document must arrive, not necessarily exactly at the same point in time, but within a period of time. And your computer knows how many packets there are and when the last one arrives. So once they've all arrived, it will show up in your email queue as an email with a Word document or whatever. You can click on it and read it. And that's the way the internet works. Well, guess what? When the election process is reporting votes, they do the same thing. They take numbers, put them in a document of some type, a format, could be an Excel spreadsheet, it's up to the various states, and they send it to the state level to be part of the final total for that state. Now, when that report is sent over the internet from the counting machines, and you need to know the counting machine, at least of all the voting process, is connected to the internet for this reporting purpose. That's why it is connected to the internet. But it's not secured internet. And so a device, a program can come in, and I'm going to give you this metaphor, this illustration of what's happening. Imagine you are driving down a major highway. It may be I-95 in the United States, over here on the East Coast, and a very famous route for going north and south. It may be the German Autobahn. It may be some other, but I'm talking about a modern highway with multiple lanes of traffic going both directions. That's the internet, because really, traffic, these little packets go both directions. Some are going out, some are coming in, and being transmitted all over the world accordingly to their addresses that I just mentioned, according to their addresses. And the switches know the addressing scheme. So they are the gatekeepers that open a lane there, close a lane there, open one there, and everything it's amazing, but it's not rocket science. It's logical and it's understandable. It's actually quite simple. And so here's what happens. The hammer opens up the switches and routes for the scorecard portion. So your car is driving down the internet. Think of that as a packet of information. And you're part of a voting total report. So you've got some numbers or partial numbers in your packet, and the other 300 packets behind you, they also have numbers. So the scorecard reaches out, grabs your car packet, opens the door, takes that data out. An algorithm computes the difference between Trump and Biden, for example, or a senator and some other senator of opposing parties. And as long as the differential between the two is 3% or less of the total, the scorecard will take votes away from Trump, put them in the Biden column, and debit the Trump. So there's not really more total votes at that point, but they are switched from Trump to Biden. The door is shut, the car is put back into the network. In this case, we're talking packets, and sent on its way. Now, what I just did, what I just told you about, happens in microseconds, so that no one is waiting. They don't even notice it. We all know that when you send an email to someone, it doesn't arrive in 1 second. It takes 10, 20, 30 seconds because of the switching an email has to go through as it makes its journey down the internet through these switches. So no one knows the better. The vote total is changed on the fly. And this is happening in multiple states across this nation. And so it's one of the other methods of cheating. Now, you have heard about the Dominion problem. Now, that's a different issue. That's software on a voting machine, not a counting machine, a voting machine. And so it simply points out that software can be hacked and changed in a voting machine to do nefarious, wrongful, illegal things, like changing votes for somebody else. Oh, you didn't vote for Trump, you voted for Biden, and that's how your ballot gets counted. And so that's what that particular problem is. But Dominion is used in numerous states, many states in these United States, and the Michigan example where Dominion took away 6,000 votes from Trump and gave it to Biden. People right now are investigating if that same 6,000 vote or some thousands of votes, that issue, that's not a glitch, that's programmed in software. If that happened in other states on a large scale. And if so, you can imagine there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of votes when you multiply 6,000 across numerous states, hundreds, if not thousands, of voting machines throughout all the counties and precincts that make up our electoral structure. Another version of cheating is happening, and that's where the counting machine that, remember, we talked about reporting the data and the scorecard grabs it over the internet. There's also a capability that Dennis Montgomery has told me about, where false logons were put into the counting machines. He used the number 5,000 logons. He didn't say 5,000 machines, but it could have been 5,000 machines or 200. I don't know that number. I'm just telling you, false logon credentials were embedded in these systems such that a remote user through a computer via the internet could log in to that counting machine and change the total before it gets reported. So you may have cases where counting machines were changed already, reported up along the internet, and the Hammer scorecard grabs it and puts another delta, changes it yet again, and adds even more votes. All right. So if this is beginning to boggle your mind a little bit, don't feel alone to keep all this straight. And there's also ballots. Now that's really where you send out a bunch of ballots and people illegally fill them out, whether they're not registered properly or legal to vote in a voting precinct in a state, and just falsely fill them out, put them in boxes, take them to the post office. We already have an example, again in Michigan, where a video camera caught a car drive up, unload 3 boxes of ballots, give them to somebody inside the post office, and drove off. So we have evidence that people in the post office were part of this conspiracy to throw this election. And those people then would take those ballots and they might even falsely postmark them to make sure they say 3 November, if you're in a state that must count them on 3 November, or at least wipe out the postmark so that no one could argue what it was. Because once you separate a ballot from the envelope, there's no way to know whether something was in on time, 3rd November, or post 3 November. Once you separate that and mix all the ballots up, it becomes a nightmare where you really have to dig deeper into the registration rolls to resolve whether a ballot was legal or not. And finally, there is the issue of false registrations. We have registration books that are kept. People are supposed to register to vote as legal residents of the area in which they vote. Those rolls are outdated. About 25% of them change every year because people move. We're a mobile society. People uproot whether they get a new job, they want to be closer to the kids, and those records are not updated as religiously, as continuously as they should be. And so people may be voting twice, once in their new state, once in their old state. Most people don't do that on purpose. But those who do it are doing it on purpose. They know they're registered twice or whatever. And so I hope this gives you a flavor for the breadth of the corruption. I am not privy on a day-to-day basis of what's being discovered. So like you, I must get my news about this from the news. And not all news media are covering it. So if you do not have access to a reliable source, I'm hoping you will turn your attention and your sourcing to LaRouche PAC, because LaRouche, I know with every bone in my body that LaRouche stands for the truth. And my God, in this day and age, that alone is golden. It's very difficult to find truthful sources of information. And with that, I'll leave it to the question and answer session. Dennis?
Okay, thank you very much, Kirk. We're going to now go to Harley Schlanger. Harley.
Thank you, Dennis, and hello, everyone. One of the questions that many of you may have is, why are we so certain there was fraud? Now, Kirk just went through a detailed picture of how fraud can be done. And we have our own experience with this. In our organization, we were involved in discovering a fraud in 1976 in Ohio, where the Democratic Party behind Jimmy Carter carried out a fraud against the Ford campaign. We proved it. We got the registrations that were phony. We did a lot of groundwork, but we couldn't prove it would have overturned the whole election. Plus, Jerry Ford didn't want to fight. We had our own bouts of fraud when Lyndon LaRouche ran for president. We would find precincts where we could get affidavits from 10, 15 people, 20 people who said they voted for Lyndon LaRouche, and no votes showed up when the vote count was done. So we know it happens, and everyone knows it happens, especially in big cities. So the question is not, can there be fraud committed, nor is it who can do this, because in many of the cities where the vote shifted dramatically, such as Milwaukee, Detroit, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, these were cities that are controlled by a Democratic Party machine that has been doing this for a long time, as we know in the case of Chicago. So the deeper question is, why? What was the need why was there such a need to conduct so many different forms of fraudulent activity, which are being investigated now, and hopefully the lawyers working with Trump, the investigators, and people who Kirk knows who are doing some work on this will dig it up. But the bigger question here is why? And this is where you have to realize we've been in a 4-year war in this country that resulted from the election of Donald Trump as an outsider at a moment of profound global crisis, where an establishment, whether you want to call it the establishment, the military-industrial complex, the deep state, we call it the British Empire because of the origins of the policy initiatives that are being pushed by these shadow government institutions. It's run the world into the ground. Its neoliberal economic policies have destroyed the capabilities of the advanced sector nations to continue to advance the level of production, productivity, scientific and technological progress that are needed to care for a growing population, which is now over 7 billion people worldwide. They've destroyed that. Their globalized policies, their green policies, which are going to go even more advanced if Biden ends up as president, have done enormous damage. Now, secondly, the strategic crises. We've been in war for 20 years in the United States, a so-called war on terror, where in many cases, as General Michael Flynn showed, the US administration, in that case, the Obama-Biden administration, was working to arm and train the terrorists who supposedly we were fighting. No, we were actually helping them. When Trump got elected, the most important issues that he raised were the issues of ending the wars and restoring sovereignty, that is, having the US government act on behalf of the interests of the American people, not only for the American people, because he advocated sovereignty for other nations as well. And the idea of sovereignty is a key concept in our Constitution. The idea that we have institutions of self-government where we elect people who act in the interests of their constituents. Now, what we're seeing in this crisis is the interlocking corporate cartels that have literally seized control of the financial institutions of the world, the military and intelligence communities in the world, have as an origin the City of London and Wall Street as a coordinating center. And these are interlocking cartels in finance, insurance, and real estate, big pharma, the energy companies, and so on. You know most of this. Now, the question that came up in 2016 was, did the vote for Donald Trump give him the power to do what he said he was going to do, end the wars and take power back away from these cartels and put it in the hands of the American people? That's what this fight is over vote fraud. Because what President Trump embarked on was an alliance or a trying to establish a cooperative relationship with Russia, with China, including in trade, to address the trade imbalances and other concerns, to take the United States out of the phony Paris Climate Accord, where we were committing ourselves to destroy our industry and energy production and agriculture, to end the free trade agreements. This was a revolution underway, and it was stopped. They tried to stop it during the election, and that's when Russiagate was concocted. As we know now, Hillary Clinton and her campaign paid a British intelligence operative to concoct a completely phony dossier to make it look like Trump was an agent of Vladimir Putin. Now, from what we know today, we see how absurd that is. But you know what? It was absurd when it was presented in the summer of 2016. But the power of the media, including social media and the tech companies, made it so that the truth of Russiagate never came out. And so we heard nothing but Russia, Russia, Russia. And when that finally was brushed aside with the pathetic performance of Robert Mueller before the Congress, we got Ukrainegate. Then we got Trump the authoritarian, Trump the racist. All of this had one intent: to destroy the potential of Donald Trump as a president acting in the interest of the American people by mobilizing the American people to fight for their own interest. Lyndon LaRouche has identified the one enemy of the United States through our history, not Russia, not China, but the British Empire. And we documented in great detail the British role in the attack, not just on Trump, but on the American system of economic policy and the commitment of that oligarchy to keep the United States entrapped in regional wars. So when Kirk says we've reached a decision point, will the Constitution survive or not? The question in dealing with this problem of the fraud, of overturning the fraud, is that we're dealing with an existential crisis, not just for Donald Trump, but for the American people. And when Trump says he's putting the interests of the American people as his primary concern, the question then is, will the American people respond? And we're seeing a response. We're seeing people fight. What we're going to do is continue to put together on every level the intelligence on the fraud, as you just heard from Kirk. What is the nature of the enemy that's out to destroy the United States? And because we are the LaRouche organization, we have a special capability, which is on economic and strategic policy. What would be in the interests of the United States economically? That is, should we finally, once and for all, put an end to this private banking system, which puts private special interests ahead of the general welfare, which is what you have when a bunch of central bankers are trying to move into a new economic regime based on a globalized digital currency in which they control not just credit policy, but spending policy, in which they take away the capability of commercial banks to aid in the investment in the real economy. That's what's coming down the pike. That's why they needed to get Biden in. to continue the wars for the sake of the military-industrial complex, to continue a regime change policy against any nation that rejects those policies, including Russia and China and the United States under Trump. And the election fraud is the latest move toward the regime change. Now, Trump has fought. The American people have become increasingly aware that there's something fraudulent in what's being presented to them in the mass media. Unfortunately, a lot of people bought into the lying from the media. That's why there was a capability to keep the vote close enough to use these vote fraud techniques. But our fight is a fight to defend not just the American system, but civilization itself. The American Republic was an example to the world of how institutions of self-government put the interests of the whole population ahead of the special interests, ahead of the bankers, ahead of the insurance companies, ahead of the cartels. And the cartels instead are saying that their interests go first. That's what this fight is. And I would urge people to study what Kirk Wiebe has said, listen to what you'll hear from Colonel Black and from Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and engage in a discussion process with your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, members of your church and synagogue and mosque, to really take up this question of, will we as an American people live up to the tradition of the American Republic? And that's what the fight is. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you, Harley. We're going to now go to Colonel Richard Black, who is also a former state senator of Virginia, who is also the former head of the Army's Criminal Law Division at the Pentagon. He has a report that had been up on the YouTube, it's still on YouTube, of I think just under 600,000 people have viewed, and has been probably the major voice that has been out there warning about this problem of the military coup issue, and probably was responsible in part for a clear statement on the part of various members of the military that there is no role for the military in the American election. So, Colonel Black, we'd like to hear anything you'd have to add at this point.
Yeah, let's back up just a little bit to the week or 2 weeks prior to the election. I recall seeing a side-by-side depiction where there was a Biden rally being held and there was a Trump rally being held. The Biden rally was principally attended by Secret Service agents and members of the Biden campaign. Very, very low energy. You could see most of the people were flicking through their cell phones. They weren't even listening to Biden. They didn't care what he had to say. The estimate was that there may have been 50 people there. If you take 50 people and you take away the Secret Service and the staffers, you may have had 24 actual voters who were present. There was no interest whatsoever in his campaign. Meanwhile, on the same screen, it depicted President Trump with an absolute sea of supporters. So we saw these pathetically small rallies by Biden where he was unable to draw more than 50 people, 30, 40 people. Kamala Harris couldn't even get that many. She's lucky if she could get a dozen people to show up. And meanwhile, the president was drawing 20, 30, 40,000 people. And sometimes he would do it on the spur of the moment. He'd just throw in a campaign stop, and people might have 2 or 3 hours notice, and people would pour out in the freezing cold and the snow, and they would go there and they would stand for hours, and there would be tens of thousands of people. Now, you can't ignore what was going on the ground and pretend that somehow Biden was inspiring people. Biden was not inspiring anyone. In fact, the election results showed that President Trump managed to bring in about 12% of the black vote. May not sound much to people who have not been involved in the political arena, but any Republican presidential candidate who breaks the 8% barrier has had a spectacular result in the inner city. The same thing happened with the Hispanic vote. I went to McDonald's while I was going to a couple of the polling places, and there was a woman, very obviously Hispanic, probably Mexican, young woman, and she was a cashier taking orders, very heavy accent, didn't speak much English, but she saw that I had a sticker on, and she looked side to side, and then she said, Trump, Trump, he's the one. And so this was going on. The Hispanics were for Trump. The blacks were for Trump. And all of America was really for Trump because he had these massive showings. Now, what happens on election night is President Trump was leading in the swing states, the ones that were going to determine the outcome of the election. He had a pretty substantial lead in most of those states, and there was a curve that went, and there would be a Trump curve up here, and below it would be a Biden curve, and they tracked one another. And the Trump curve was higher than the Biden curve. And as votes would come in, each one would inch up, but the Trump curve was significantly higher, and it was clearly winning. Then at a certain time, principally during the morning hours, often the very early morning hours of Wednesday, the day after the election, there was suddenly a very radical change, and in both Michigan and in Wisconsin, instead of having the curves that had been running, you suddenly had a vertical spike for Biden, which put him in the lead in both states instantly. It wasn't as though he curved upwards and managed to somehow overcome the Trump votes, but he spiked instantly. And so 1 minute he was significantly behind, the next minute he was substantially ahead. And so this was very, very suspicious. Now, throughout this campaign, the Biden president or Vice President Biden has appeared very frail, very feeble, and not fully in control of his faculties. I saw a video just today where he was congratulating Kamala Harris, and he had to read from a script. Here he is congratulating his vice presidential running mate, and he can't even do that without reading from a script that's been prepared for him. So we had an extraordinarily weak candidate, and so what happened with the rest of the election? We saw these votes suddenly come in mysteriously for Vice President Biden. Well, if you're seeing increased votes for Biden, and certainly you're going to see increased votes for the Democrat senators, the Democrat members of the House of Representatives. But what actually happened, the Democrats have been predicting a blue wave of massive votes in their favor. They actually picked up a single Senate seat, which has left the Republicans in control of the Senate, and they suffered devastating losses in the House. They still control the House, But previously, before this election, they had a very substantial buffer in their favor, and now they're sort of on a razor's edge. There's serious doubt that Nancy Pelosi will be reelected as the Speaker of the House. Since the Democrats did not take control of the Senate, Senator Mitch McConnell will be in position to block radical legislation by the socialist/communist elements of the party, such as AOC. And so we're not going to see the Biden tax plan. We're not going to see Medicare for all. We're not going to see the new Green Deal. There will not be 2 new senators each for Puerto Rico or for the District of Columbia. So there won't be any reparations for slavery. That bizarre proposal will not go anywhere. Now, so the blue wave never occurred. So the question would be, well, if it didn't occur down ballot, if it didn't occur for the senators and for the state representatives, how in the heck did it occur for Biden only? Well, Sidney Powell has come out just today, I believe, and she said that there were 450,000 ballots submitted in the early morning hours of Wednesday. None of them were marked with selections for Senate or for congressional races. The only thing that they voted for was for the president. Now, you and I know that doesn't happen. People don't vote like that. If you go in and you're charged up for Joe Biden, typically you're going to vote for the Democrat senator and the Democrat representative. There'll be a little bit of shifting, a little bit of ballot splitting in some states, but it's never going to be dramatic, and it's never going to involve situations where you have voters who simply do not bother to cast a ballot at all for Senate or for House of Representatives. Some of the numbers that I've heard from Sidney Powell of these fake ballots, these very obviously fraudulent ballots: Pennsylvania 98,000, Michigan 69 to 115,000, Wisconsin 62,000, Georgia 80 to 90,000, Arizona 42,000. Now, you have to combine this. This was apparently a massive, well-planned, well-financed scheme to overthrow the election. So you had this hammer, this false computer program, and you had the program where you have the Hammer scorecard. And the Hammer scorecard is designed to intercept computer voting, which is something that should never have been allowed. There should never be computer voting allowed, but it is. And so you divert a certain number of election votes, and you simply flip them, and you do it in a way that where you've got the software and it is reading the current ballot results that come in, and it's adjusting. It's making modifications so that it switches Trump votes over to Biden votes. And I think there is substantial reason to believe that this is happening. It's interesting that the National Security Agency developed this software so that we could throw elections in foreign countries, and we could basically overthrow the democratic process in nations, particularly in Eastern Europe and in some of the former Soviet republics. And it's sort of ironic that here we are, and because we acted deceitfully and immorally, and we took away the fair votes of people in other countries, now it appears that the same software has been used illicitly because it's not allowed. The CIA, believe it or not, is allowed to cheat and to falsify foreign elections, which should never be permitted by this country. But it is permitted, it is lawful, and now it appears that they have done so illicitly in this country as well. In addition, we have things like sort of ordinary voter fraud. We had a fellow in Texas, and they just brought charges against him today, 138 charges of voter fraud. And basically what he was doing is he was casting votes on behalf of people who were incapacitated. If you're incapacitated, you do not have a right to vote at all, but he was casting votes. We also have situations where we have had one postmaster official, a supervisory official, where there have been, I believe there have been charges now brought, and he was instructing his subordinates to backdate ballots that came in so that they would be able to be counted. And the way that it happens, there is a cutoff date. If an incoming ballot comes in late, if it's postmarked late, then it's invalid. So he was setting these aside. He was telling subordinates, set them aside, and then he would make sure that they were post-date or backdated so that they would appear to be valid. So it looks to me that my personal assessment is that there has been massive fraud, massive voter fraud. Voter fraud is not a new thing in the United States. We have a long and colorful history of voter fraud. If you go back to the 1960 election between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, I think historians fairly commonly agree that what happened, it was a very close election, and it came down to Illinois. And the Kennedy people called Mayor Daley in Chicago. Of course, Chicago was the home of gangsters, Al Capone, Murder Incorporated. It was an utterly corrupt city, and it was run by a big boss, Mayor Richard Daley. And he was connected with all the mafia figures, all the crime figures in the city. And Kennedy's people said, we're short. We're going to lose this election. And Daley said, what do you need to win? They said, we need so many votes. He said, you got them. And so he went in, he produced them. They joked about how many people voted from the graveyards. The old graveyard scam is still in operation. It's being used, but there are much bigger things. The Democrats are approaching this from every possible angle. They're committing voter fraud, I believe, in every particular area that they can find. But it's important to remember, now you'll often hear the mainstream media say, there is simply no real evidence of voter fraud. It really doesn't happen. It's all a myth. But you go back to the 1960 election with Kennedy and Nixon, and it's fairly widely acknowledged that that presidential election was thrown. Now, in that election, we were talking about one major city that came in with a corrupt vote, and that was enough to tip the balance. In this case, it is my impression from watching the balloting as it came in during the night, from watching the rallies that were just spectacular. There's never been a president ever who has brought in these huge waves of people to come and see him. And he's done it one after the other. We're within the span of a couple of days, he's talked to 250,000 people directly. And then you compare that with Joe Biden, who's hunkering down in his basement with his little mask and all of this, and when he comes out, he talks to a dozen or 24 people. I am convinced that there has been massive voter fraud, and that it was sufficient to throw the election. I am fairly confident. I had my doubts about whether Trump was going to win 3 weeks out from the election. I would not have made the statement then, but he had the big momentum. Momentum was on his side, and he was roaring along. And so if President Biden, if Vice President Biden ends up being certified the winner, elected by the Electoral College, he will take over as a badly wounded president. He will be widely perceived as an illicit president, and so his presidency would be tainted from the outset. He will be hobbled by the fact that the House elections were a disaster for Democrats. Even the Washington Post said that the House races had fallen drastically behind expectations. The terrible blow to Nancy Pelosi. She was greatly weakened. And also there was an abysmal showing within the states, which means that the Democrats will have a severe disadvantage heading into redistricting. And what that will mean is that they're going to have a 10-year span in which they will have a great deal of difficulty reconstituting their majority, because the Republicans will do the redistricting in most of these states. So we find if there is a Biden administration, it's going to be very weakened, and one representative who supposedly won in Virginia, Representative Abigail Spanberger, just became furious in a discussion with Nancy Pelosi and the other Democrats, and she said we need not ever use the word socialist or socialism ever again, while people think, even though some people think it doesn't matter, it does matter. And she said we lost good members because of that. And then she said the defund the police movement has really hurt her and other so-called moderates in tight races. She was very angry. She was cursing on the phone. And so I think we're faced with a situation where if Biden is sworn in, and I'm not sure that he is, that he's going to be severely weakened.
Okay, thank you very much. I see that Jim Jatras has joined us, and I'm very glad you're with us, Jim. I know you may not have been able to be there for the full discussion, but if you could give us some remarks. Let me also remark now, we have several people that are waiting for questions. We will be getting to the questions. I got a couple of notes about that. So Jim, we'll go to you, and then we'll go to Helga.
Very good, thank you. And first off, let me apologize for my being late on this call. I somehow got the time wrong in my mind. I'm glad that Senator Black referred to his video and how many views it got from a few weeks ago about what was likely to happen on the running up to this election. I hope I'm responsible for part of how many viewers it got, because I was certainly sending around to anyone I could possibly get it to. If I can play a little bit of prophet myself, and of course I've got the beard for it, I had put out something about 3 weeks ago, including a link to Senator Black's video about what we're likely to see here in terms of trying to manage the results of the election and really to stage something very similar to a color revolution type regime change operation that we've sponsored in so many other countries and now are inflicting upon ourselves. When I say we, I don't mean the American people. I mean the deep state, the corporate plutocracy, and our foreign friends, if you want to call them, in other countries. That and the likelihood of a blue shift that would take a seeming Republican victory on election night and then overturn it in the period right after that. In this case, in a very short period of time, in a matter of hours. I think we see right now. We see something, kind of a predictable unfolding of the rest of that scenario. Once they got Biden over the top, over on the numbers, we saw the rush of the media to then project him as the winner, to lock him into the public's mind to the extent possible as the president-elect. I mean, it's been amazing when you turn on mainstream media, listen to local here in Washington, WTOP. It's nothing but celebrations for President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. No hint at all that there's anything wrong with this. I think that wall of silence is beginning to break down. You're starting to hear some worried talk coming from the supposedly winning camp that, well, Trump is not conceding and they're not letting the transition team for Biden get into the General Services Administration, the Commerce Department, to set up their offices. And even though they have produced no evidence, they're still going to be fighting this. I think that certainty is breaking down. When Bill Kristol sends out a tweet saying he's worried, I take that to heart. I'm very happy that somebody like him is worried. So the question now, it seems to me, is this: if it looks like things are going to not be finalized, and what that really means, and I'll touch on this in a moment, is the naming electors from the various states to meet at the Electoral College on December 14th to officially make Biden the president-elect. If that is not going to go so smoothly over the next few weeks, then the question is, what do they do next? And I think they've got a few more cards to play. One would be to start mobilizing their street mob again. Go back to the program from earlier this summer with Black Lives Matter and Antifa and the rest of the fun crowd trashing places to put heat on the political system in a way that would send a message to the Republicans, not only the Republicans and Trump personally, but anybody who supports them, that if you really want to press this, things are going to get really ugly. And you may win or not win, but if you think you can win, we will burn this country down. And is that really worth it? So I think we're going to see that, frankly, an appeal to terrorism, to terrorize the political system. So I think we will see some of that. And then, of course, if they can get Biden impaneled certified at the Electoral College on December 14th, then I think we'll see what the other thing that Senator Black pointed to, the military coup aspect of this, that the Transition and Integrity Project will do their thing and try to get people in the government, especially in the national security apparatus, to make sure that Trump has to step down, despite what will be apparent to everybody at that point, that the election had in fact been stolen. What can be done in the meantime? You've seen now a lot of initiatives for the Trump people to come out onto the streets themselves, massive rallies around the country. There's supposed to be a big one in Washington this coming Saturday, the 14th. I don't know how that's likely to turn out. One of the big points of focus that I've been trying to suggest to people is that under Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution, the state legislatures direct the naming of electors. It's not the governor, it's not the Secretary of State, it's not the Elections Board, it's a state legislature. Now, in the normal course of things, that means the legislature passes an election law, the election law is duly carried out, and a winner is certified by that state, electors are named, and they go to the Electoral College. What happens when that process is corrupted? Or if the legislature believes the process has been corrupted, is there anything in the Constitution that says somehow that authority has left their hand and they no longer have the exclusive right to name electors. And in my opinion, no. This is certainly something that can be litigated. And especially if you look at Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, where you have corrupt Democratic administrations in those states, you have Republican legislatures. And it seems to me that those legislatures would be well within their rights to ensure that no electors are named from those states until all the allegations of fraud have been investigated, until there has been a full audit of all the ballots, and that they've been all witnessed and of their recounting and verified by observers from all parties. So there's no question of this. If Joe Biden and his people really thought they had won this election fair and square, they would be asking for that. Because if would they want to take office under a cloud, if that's what ends up happening, when at least half the country believes that they were cheated? You think they would be calling for a thorough investigation if they thought they had actually won? But I think it's almost proof positive that they know that they had not, that what they're seeking to do is shut the process down. Nothing to see here, folks. Oh, sure, maybe there are a few little isolated incidents here, but nothing widespread, nothing that would change the results. We all know that Joe Biden is the president-elect, just like we all know that all this stuff about Hunter Biden is really just Russian disinformation. So the fact that they're trying to, their line is essentially pay no attention to that man behind the curtain and just let's move on, I think tells us that speaks volumes. So right now, it seems to me that not only does the legal front need to be pushed, the people have to make their voice heard. And I think especially the state legislatures need to act. And that includes not only Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, but I would also say Georgia, where even though you have a Republican governor, Fulton County is a very corrupt Democrat-run county. That's where the problem is, in Georgia primarily, and I think also the legislature in Arizona needs to act. So I've been appealing to people: if you live in those states, contact the Republican leadership of the state house and Senate and ask them to ensure no electors until these allegations are investigated, till the cases are heard, and until all of the votes are verified. Don't just sweep it all under the rug. I am somewhat less optimistic than Senator Black is about what happens if Biden ends up on top. First off, we don't know yet that the Republicans will still control the Senate. We have, it looks like now, 2 special elections in Georgia coming up in January. And there's already been a lot of talk on the internet about people moving to Georgia, again, organized moving to Georgia by the Democrats within the period necessary to be eligible to vote in the election, to try to put the 2 Democratic candidates over the top. And even if, and I don't want to be too harsh in this, but even if somehow the Senate does remain in Republican hands, I'm not sure how much of an obstacle that will be to a new Democratic administration. That, yeah, there's some things they won't be able to get through the Congress, but on the other hand, there's an awful lot that they will simply do by decree, by executive order. I remember Obama's line, "I have a pen and I have a phone." They will simply start doing things, and it will be very, very difficult for Republican Senate to stop them. Yeah, there will be court cases. And let's remember, too, that one of the problems when we think about not only the challenges to the election or what may happen if Biden takes office is that when Democrats appoint somebody to the bench, they get a hardcore partisan. They get what they ask for. Whereas when Republicans put a judge on the bench or a justice on the Supreme Court, what they get is what they ask for, which is a strict construction. Somebody who will interpret the law and the Constitution as written, will call balls and strikes, will not be a partisan. And part of that is deference to the political branches of government, unless there's overwhelming reason not to. So that's one of the things I worry about in this whole process. Is not that it's not wrong to take that as a judicial philosophy, but in terms of how things will work out, we may very well might find the case where when things get to the court basically defers on the issue and say, well, we won't inquire into that. That is really a topic for the political authorities in the state. And if they're corrupt, or if there's not overwhelming evidence that they're corrupt, they may let it slide. I'm not that confident that the truth will be vindicated in such a case. I would say the same things, by the way, and this relates to what I said earlier about state legislatures, is that the people, the voters, are with Trump. A lot of Republican office holders are not. And a lot of them, either openly and many more of them secretly, would be thrilled if Trump were to go down in flames, because they imagine that we will get back to the respectable old Republican Party that really doesn't differ with the Democrats on much of anything significant, especially, and this to me is the real kicker in the thing, especially when it comes down to the issues of war and peace and the kind of posture that America has been assuming abroad for several decades. We've had the phenomenon for all 4 years of Trump, where all these neoconservative warmongers, both covertly and overtly, have been on the anti-Trump bandwagon. I think we've seen, who is it? Apparently, Dick Cheney is advising the Biden transition team. Mrs. McCain, John McCain's widow, is advising the transition team. That Joe Biden, if he does become president, I know some people on the left maybe hope he will be a more peaceful president, because Trump, I think, feeling so embattled, has felt he has to defend himself by even being more militant than his critics want him to be. Oh, look, I hit Syria 2 times. Nobody's been tougher on Russia than I have. All this other kind of nonsense. If and when Biden becomes president, I think it'll be Katie bar the door for the kind of aggression we will see abroad. That Joe Biden is, whatever is left of Joe Biden at this point, is kind of a Democrat John McCain. He's never met a war he didn't like. Let's remember, specifically in the Balkans in the 1990s, he was right there, most bloodthirsty voice in the Senate for involvement of those wars, as well as supporting the Iraq War and helping to whip votes for that. And so I'm not optimistic about that. I'm not optimistic about looking at the team he would assemble if he does take office. If you start looking at the names like Michelle Flournoy and Nick Burns and Anthony Blinken and all the rest of them, I mean, these people make Mike Pompeo look like Mahatma Gandhi. So we have nothing optimistic to look forward to on that front if Biden does come out on top. And I guess that's the last thing I would want to say is that a lot of this, we look at it and say, well, they were really determined to get rid of Trump and put Biden in the White House. But when you think about it, given his age and the fact that he has a medical advisor who thinks we should all die at the age of 75, and Biden is 77, that I don't think the expectations for Biden's lasting out even the first of his terms, if he's elected, are all that great. That in effect, what we're having hand selected for us by the establishment is Kamala Harris as the 47th president of the United States, somebody that nobody wanted to be president. Even Democrats in their primary did not want Kamala Harris. She was the first one to drop out, and suddenly, if they come out on top, she's the odds-on favorite to become yet the next president of the United States after the shell of Joe Biden. So I hope that Trump's lawyers, with the support of not only the people, which is most important, but even critical mass of Republican politicians, can prevail. I'm a little concerned that not too much reliance not be put on Attorney General Barr and the Justice Department, because we know how much corruption there is in the Justice Department, specifically in the FBI, as it's been on display the last few years. I think people like Sidney Powell and even Rudy Giuliani are much more reliable in terms of legal advocacy for the Trump team. But we live in very, very dangerous times. And my fear is not only winning and losing this election, but if the Biden people do manage to steal this election, and that's really what it's all about, in my opinion. I think a lot of talk about election reform and things like that, that's shutting the barn door after the horse is gone. That once they are in, they will find a way to ensure that there will never again will be another competitive election at the national level. So in my opinion, this one is for all the marbles, and not only the future of our republic, but frankly of the peace and survival of the world are at stake. And I hope the American people understand that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We having a technical problem? You all right? Okay, fine. I want to just say we will go after Jim, then Moritz, and then Sarah, as I understand it. Those will be the first 3 people. And as we introduce Helga, I want to say this. Americans underestimate the power of poetry. Poet Percy Shelley once said that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. People often think these are pretty words, except the preeminent political intelligence masters of the 18th and 19th century were Friedrich Schiller, and in the case of America, Edgar Poe. Not Edgar Allan Poe, Edgar Poe, the poet and writer. American intelligence was supposed to be built through the process that Edgar Poe was responsible for. He was a political intelligence agent. But the main idea is that you have axioms, and the axioms that you hold often defeat you. What we need to do, I think, is raise our sights. I think what Jim just said concerning the question for the world and what was said earlier by Colonel Black about the chickens basically coming home to roost in the United States after decades of corrupt practices in many other countries. And so as we go to Helga, and then we'll go to Q questions and answers, I'd like people to ponder the idea that there may be factors at work here in the realm of ideas that are essential for them to master in the next hours. If in fact, the American presidency or any other presidency outside of certain nations like Russia or China, if any other presidency is to be able to survive. So Helga, we'd like to go to you, and then we'll go to questions and answers.
Well, I was the most shocked in the last week when I watched some of the US major TV stations when Trump gave a press conference. And you could see how the heads of some of the TV stations interrupted the president of the United States speaking by saying we don't agree what he's saying. He is now putting forward fake news, and therefore we overrule the president of the United States speaking. And that came from several TV stations. I mean, this is a scandal so big. I mean, if this would happen in any kind of banana republic, it would be an outrage because it would still be a violation of sovereignty of that country. But that this is happening to supposedly the most powerful man of the most powerful country on the planet, I think that fact alone should wake people up that what we are looking here is dictatorship. It's the complete danger of loss of freedom. Now, I find it equally revealing that immediately after Biden was declared by the media to be the winner, not by the Electoral College, but by the media, all the Atlanticists in Europe and elsewhere immediately said, oh, we immediately congratulate Biden. It's so good that the whole old system is back here. While, this was von der Leyen, Merkel, Steinmeier, Röttgen, all of these people totally died in the wool Atlanticists. They congratulated Biden. But the so-called autocratic governments, they said, no, we have to wait what the legal and democratic process in the United States will result in, and we will not congratulate Biden until that has been established. And this was by such, quote, autocrats like Putin, like the Chinese government, like the president of Mexico, of Bolivia. So, maybe in the whole narrative of who is for democracy and transparency is not exactly what people are supposed to believe. Now, I think we have reached historically a point of absolute decision. And, if you think about what is in the American Declaration of Independence, I think we are exactly at that moment. And I just want to read you one sentence from this declaration. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under despotism, it is their right, their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Now, that is the principle on which the United States was based as a young republic. And, this is also an idea which was used by Friedrich Schiller whose birthday we celebrate today, and that's why I'm quoting it also, because he is the poet of freedom, and he has written so many things which were really strategic studies of how to deal with such situations as we are experiencing now. He wrote a whole drama where, he referenced very clearly this fight of the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence. And this was his very celebrated and popular drama, popular around the world, Wilhelm Tell, which plays naturally in Switzerland, and which is the question there also: would the Swiss people accept the tyranny of the Habsburg, or would they shed this tyranny? So in the famous Rüttli Oath, which is almost, if you compare that to the Declaration of Independence, you can actually see how the same ideas inspired Schiller. So he writes there, "No, there is a limit to the tyrant's power when the oppressed can find no justice. When the burden grows unbearable, he reaches with hopeful courage up unto the heavens and seizes hither his eternal rights, which hang above, inalienable and indestructible as stars themselves. The primal state of nature reappears, where man stands opposite his fellow man. As a last resort, when no other means is of avail, the sword is given him, the highest of all goods we may defend from violence. Thus we stand before our country, thus we stand before our wives and before our children." Now, obviously, Schiller was very, very careful with the last scene of that drama to make sure that people would not draw out of this whole play the right to commit terrorism or violence. He's very, very careful. So if you read this drama, which I want to encourage you to do, please read the last scene, because there have been performances where that was left out, and then people took that as a encouragement of violence in the streets, which is explicitly not meant by Schiller. But otherwise, I think the ideas of the Declaration of Independence, that a point has reached where there is enough, that this must end, and the idea of Friedrich Schiller, no, there is a limit to the tyrant's power. That is the message which everybody should carry in themselves in the next period. And I think we need an international mobilization, because the outcome of this fight is not just an American question. As Kirk Wiebe said in the beginning, if this, and I think Dennis said it, and Mr. Jatras also, that if this fight is lost, I think the whole world will be under a dictatorship. And I think also, the Biden team, which is coming on, or would be coming on, stands for war. And there are some more patriotic forces in Europe who have said so, Willy Wimmer being one of them, but also people from the right and from the left who are thinking people, have clearly said that the whole confrontation against Russia and China, the whole expansion of NATO into the Indo-Pacific, the encirclement of Russia and China, which has been going on with Bush and Cheney and Obama before, would probably really bring us to a catastrophe. So everything is at stake, and therefore I think we should take the words of the Declaration of Independence of Friedrich Schiller to heart.
All right. Thank you very much. Highly efficient, I'd like to say. All right. So I think we're ready to go to questions. I said first that Jim would be first. I do have one comment that I think I want to leave because, and this I think was for you, Kirk. This was Mary Fanning, who was on and who said, Montgomery built the hammer to keep America safe. Dennis Montgomery built the hammer to keep America safe after 9/11. Brennan and Clapper illegally commandeered it and turned it on America. So just that's at the comment. All right, are we able to go to now the Zoom, and is Jim there?
Yes, this is Jim Mulligan. And let me preface my,
We're having a little problem with your audio.
okay?
Yeah, it's breaking up.
Are we better now?
No, it's got a wobble in it.
How about now?
We heard you earlier and it was fine. No, it's still happening. We heard you earlier and it was fine. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I haven't done anything. I was on mute. It seems like I'm getting a little bit more.
Yeah,
It's very clear on Zoom. I don't know.
perhaps what you should do is
Can
it
you-
just
We
my
can
thing? Maybe it's
hear him
just me.
well. I'm thinking,
Is it coming
I-
in
maybe.
clear, you, Helga? No.
There's a wobble.
Yeah, we're getting a wobble.
Perhaps you could go ahead and ask, and we can see if we can understand it enough to answer it.
Yeah, if you can be, you're probably gonna have to be short though, because we won't be able to try it.
Well, it's not necessarily a
Wait a
question,
minute,
but I'm very,
we're not hearing you right now.
I can?
You're muted. Yeah, now you're back on.
Okay, back on?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, let me say I'm delighted to participate in this very important and timely roundtable. I was very eager to listen to the speakers. And as a former mayoral candidate in the city of Scranton, Pennsylvania, and as an individual who experienced voter fraud, I was very concerned with some of the shenanigans, if you will, for lack of a better word, taking place in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and other places across the state. In particular, though, I'm concerned about the Pennsylvania Supreme Court intervening in connection with extending the period of time in which to count votes. As I believe the first speaker indicated, that is a legislative process. It's a legislative responsibility. I certainly believe, as a lawyer, that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has overstepped their bounds, and I'm hoping that that's part and parcel of the Trump campaign's challenges. I'm not sure if
Okay,
anybody.
good. We were able to make it out, and I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will respond. I was told that it's clear on YouTube and also on the Zoom, but just not to us. I think we all got it though, basically, correct? Does anybody want to respond?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Right.
It is true. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court basically took over the legislative function and simply changed the law and said, look, because of COVID, we're going to extend the time for submitting ballots. They did this in complete repudiation of our system of separation of powers and checks and balances. The courts have no role in writing laws. At least they should not have any role in doing so. And they have taken away the right of the legislature. Now, the legislature, had they been concerned about COVID and its impact, they could very easily have convened a special session of the legislature, very quickly passed a law to extend the time for submissions if necessary. They chose not to do so. And as a consequence, the legislature, in a sense, had acted by not acting. They are the ones who are entitled to make the laws. The courts don't make the laws. and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court acted beyond the bounds of its authority.
Thank you very much. In
Very
addition,
good. Can we go to the next person? Is that Moritz? Dave, did you hear? I think, is Moritz there?
Moritz is here. He's unmuted now. Moritz, are you there?
Okay, if not, yeah,
I can't hear him.
okay, if not, let's try Sarah.
Okay. Sarah?
Okay. I'm
Are
here.
you able to
Can
hear
you
me?
hear me?
We're having a problem with the,
Yeah, We
audio.
can hear you,
Yes.
Sarah. I can hear you. I don't know if Dennis.
Yes, but
can.
it's broken.
Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and
Try
I
again.
have a couple questions. I said it's a pleasure to be here, and I have a couple questions. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm a journalist as well, and I have my own show and stuff. And so I've been covering a lot of things. And I have two questions here. One is more simple, but really insightful. And I saw a report about Antifa this morning, and that Antifa, a crowd of Antifa, where, in Portland, which is their headquarters, they went to the DNC headquarters and broke all the windows, riots, and so forth. And what I was reading was that the Democratic Party has a a bill to pay. They owe them. And so they're mad. They're there to get payment. So they made some kind of soft agreement, which we've all saw with the riots over the summer. And now they seem to maybe have turned on them. There's something weird going on there. And if anybody has insight in that. And then the last, that was more of a simple thing, even though it doesn't seem so simple. And the last thing is more big picture. I did a documentary on the World Economic Forum. They are using COVID as the basis for doing a complete reset. And Donald Trump is not playing ball. They need him out of the way to get a world reset underway. And when you say the entire world is on the line, I want to ask you, my opinion is that we need to fight and make sure that we need to fight for every Senate seat. We need to fight for every congressional seat. And we need to keep this presidency intact with Donald Trump and fight the entire way, because I think if he goes down, very concerned that the world could fall because of their worldwide reset that they have going on. And there's a lot more behind it, but I want to hear what you have to say about that. So those are my two things.
Okay, I'm going to ask that Helga answer the second question. I don't know if who wants to take the first question. Harley, how about you?
Well, we're still taking a look at this whole Antifa operation, but there's an element here that, again, this is where it's so important to look at this from a strategic picture. This is something which exists in Europe. It goes with NATO, the whole NATO operation, the attacks on Italy in the 70s, the attacks in Germany in the 80s, and especially around the reunification, where leaders of Germany who were open to working together with the Russians to rebuild the country were assassinated by the third generation of the Baader-Meinhof, which no one knows whether it even existed or not. And then if you look at the most recent example, look at Ukraine. And this is where Biden becomes a particularly interesting figure to look at. Biden was the point man for the Obama administration in Ukraine. Now, I'm not just talking about stealing money and corruption with Hunter Biden and Burisma. That's something that should be investigated, and I think will be. I'm talking about Joe Biden working with the neoconservatives of the Victoria Nuland type in the U.S. State Department, working with George Soros and the non-governmental organizations, working with NATO forces, and working with the neo-Nazis or Nazis, actual Nazis of the Stefan Bandera group, the Azov Battalion, and so on, that carried out the massacre in Maidan Square that led to the coup in Ukraine. And we see something similar unfolding today in Belarus. This is the classic example of the color revolution regime change operation. And this is what was set up with Antifa, with the Black Lives Matter. You know, there are elements of this where there were honest people who were brought into the streets to demonstrate. But the people behind it, including the same Soros and Ford Foundation money, the same Gene Sharp, Color Revolution, Norman Eisen, a Democratic Party activist who's very much involved in this, they were setting up and still have in place an operation. If there is a reversal of this election by the rejection of the vote fraud and the prosecution of the people who did it, they have in place these kinds of violent hooligans to unleash in the United States. So I think this is part of the whole operation. You know, it's not as simple as was the Democratic Party hiring them. It's that this is part of the destabilization of the United States and the bringing of the method of regime change to America. Again, what Kirk was talking about, the same way that we targeted other countries' elections, that we've carried out regime change against governments that don't accept the global bankers' dictatorship, that same method is being applied in the United States against Donald Trump. And that's what you see with Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and others.
Okay.
Yeah, but why did they
Helga?
attack the DNC headquarters? Because that didn't answer the question.
The reality is that the transatlantic financial system is completely
okay.
bankrupt. If you look at the $20 trillion which has been pumped in the system since approximately 1 year through the central banks, this money has gone almost entirely to the speculators, to the banks, and you know what they know this cannot be extended forever. So I think the Great Reset is really the effort to consolidate a world fascist system, what Michael Ledeen used to call universal fascism. The idea is that the central banks, the 7 major central banks, who are all preparing the digitalization of the currencies, are intending to put that into place at the beginning of 2021. And then, you know, you would have the extension of the total surveillance state, you know, conducted by the NSA and the British equivalent CGHQ to the financial system, that basically every expense, everything you are doing would be monitored. And naturally, this, once you have the digitalization of the currencies, you can devalue the debt very, very easily. And that way they intend to get rid of the absolutely unpayable indebtedness of the system at the expense of the ordinary saver and citizen. Right now, you have a situation where David Beasley, who is the head of the World Food Program, you know, he was the governor, I think, of North Carolina or South Carolina for one term many years ago. He is now the head of the World Food Program. He is a supporter of Trump, one of the first supporters of Trump. And he put out the statement that already this year, 7 million people have died. In the next 3 months, another 30 million people are threatened with starvation. And if a ridiculous $5 billion cannot be raised, then the danger is that in 2021, 260 million people will die of hunger. Now, in the meantime, the 2,000 billionaires during the COVID crisis have become richer and richer, and the mass of the population gets poorer and poorer. So I think we have reached a point where it really comes down to, will the central banks establish world dictatorship, world government through the control of the financial system, or can we get back the sovereign power of governments? And my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, already many years has designed a program how you can take the power away from Wall Street and the City of London, starting with the implementation of a Glass-Steagall banking separation, exactly like Roosevelt did it in 1933, establish a national bank, nationalize the Federal Reserve, then issue long-term credit for real investment in the tradition of Alexander Hamilton, and then establish among the national banks of the world a new Bretton Woods system in the tradition of Franklin D. Roosevelt, as he has intended it, namely to increase the living standard of every single human being on this planet. So there is a remedy, but it requires that the people understand that with President Trump, there is a chance to implement such a program, but you have to have an educated citizenship who understand that. And hopefully Trump can get the backing to go back to what he talked about in the 2016 campaign, namely Glass-Steagall. He hasn't talked about it since, but he has definitely the potential to go in this direction. But I think it requires an incredible mobilization of the people of goodwill around the globe, because there is no way how you can solve these problems which are so universal in one country alone. So we need a summit of the most powerful countries in the world. President Putin has called for such a summit. And I think that the best thing which Trump could do, despite the present trouble, to go to such a summit and because I think that we need to put a different agenda on the table, because once these bankers implement their scheme, and that would be the Green Deal of Biden, which would be a terrible program of depopulation, because there is a correlation between the energy flux density used in the production process and the number of people you can maintain. So we are looking not only at world dictatorship, we are looking at depopulation, genocide on a scale which we have never seen in history. So that is really what is at stake.
Okay. All right, fine. Now we're just going to do a test, because we're going to test the audio. So Dave, do you want to do something with Diane just to see if we are able to hear clearly or not?
Shall I speak? Can you hear me, Dennis?
Yeah, that's very clear. Sounds fine.
Okay. That's good.
All right, so that means that we should be able to get the audio clear from our Zoom platform. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm on the Zoom platform, correct.
Okay, great. So can we, Dave, will be able to go to the next person? Or if I actually announce the
Sorry,
next person?
Dennis, if you can
But
hear
if
me,
not, yeah.
I know we have a lot of people. Sarah Westall sent a note saying that she felt her question was not answered, and I don't know if that's because you couldn't hear it. I don't know if you can go back to her.
I don't know. Is she there?
I'm here.
We're listening. I'm not able to hear.
Oh, you can hear me? Now you're able to hear. Okay, the first question, I bet you.
Now we can hear.
He didn't. You can hear me. I bet you Harley didn't hear my question, because he just explained who Antifa was. My point was that Antifa turned on the DNC. They had a soft coalition going. They turned on the DNC in their Portland. They have their headquarters in Portland, and they rioted at the DNC, broke all their windows, and they are showing anger towards the DNC. And so there's some breakdown in their allegiance together, which is very interesting. And then as far as my bigger question, I did a documentary on the whole World Economic Forum. I know that their plans are really big, really nefarious, and it's very scary. And I've talked to Harley about all those things as well. My point is if Trump falls, if he's gone and Biden is in place, how much does that help their plan? I mean, is the world pretty much hosed? Are we in trouble if Trump falls? And how much should we fight? I think we need to fight the entire time to keep him in place, because it's very strategic that he's there to create a shield against this World Economic Forum, which is hell bent on killing a lot of people in this world and doing a world global dictatorship. I mean, it's very, very serious.
Okay, Jim's got his hand up. So Jim?
Yeah, let me briefly address both points because I do think that the two previous answers shed a lot of light on it. With regard to the first one, I don't know about the specific incident in Portland about Antifa attacking these offices, but one of the problems with when you use radical groups like this as foot soldiers, they don't always stay on the leash. I mean, I keep getting reminded of Benghazi, where we were supporting basically Al-Qaeda in Libya as a tool to overthrow Gaddafi. And then, you know, these are very nasty people. Sometimes they turn on their handlers and bite the hand that's been feeding them. So I think there's maybe some aspect of that where Antifa can be mobilized as part of a street mob for pedagogical purposes, if you will, in the same way that is typical of color revolutions. But you don't necessarily control all of these individuals. In many cases, I think are very disturbed people, very mentally and emotionally ill people. With regard to the second point, I think Helga covered the big picture of what we're facing. The only short thing that to address your immediate question is what happens if Trump goes down and Biden does take office. I think we can see a very quick acceleration of these trends. And one of the first things I would be looking at would be a new lockdown justified by the virus, of course, which has paid big dividends for them with the mail-in balloting and just the way this election has been run, and a national mask mandate. We're looking at probably a forced vaccination at some point. Our governor here in Virginia, whether I don't know if he's the guy in the blackface or the Klan hood, but he's one of those guys, has already said that we're going to get a mandated vaccine here in Virginia, and I don't know how much people will submit to that. And let's remember that all of the trends that Helga talked about accelerate during these periods because that you see the shutting down of especially small and medium businesses, mom and pop stores, and so forth, and the money being funneled out of the middle class to all the billionaires, the big corporations. And plus you have more and more people because of the lockdown, because of the isolation, who are mentally and psychologically very vulnerable to manipulation. So I think that all of the larger trends that Helga talked about will accelerate very quickly if Biden does manage to come on top in this election. And by the way, and a corollary of that would be Fauci will be the virtual health dictator for this country if Biden wins, I think.
Thank you. Let me just make one thing here because I think we now have a group of people. I want to announce we're going to do Carlos, Joe, Sophia, Cara. Those are the four next, just so people have that announcement. And though I would not normally do this, I want to make one comment, my own concerning this. I think Jim is very got that right. Specifically, people are talking about Antifa, but it's Antifa. It's an international operation, and it's a nasty international operation. And it's part of something that was created as a rogue army starting in 1979. Has been evolved into various forms, called Al-Qaeda, called ISIS, called many things. But it has everything to do with the apparatus that we hope to be able to expose through this election. The only efficient way, in other words, to ever get at that apparatus is exactly the kind of thing that Kirk outlined. Because if you do that in the theater of the United States, where that same apparatus is being deployed through the electoral process, not meaning simply the stealing of votes, but the particular way that Kirk has described it. Because the shock troops in the street are simply the forward base people for the people you don't see, for the shadow people. People keep calling this the deep state, but actually, Kirk told you exactly who it is. And that, I think, is why we're here. And our approach is we are going to make sure that does not happen, that being this Biden-Harris process. So we are take that. And as I've said to some of our people before, don't even go to thinking about what's going to happen if, not because you shouldn't be prepared, but because you should be completely, utterly committed. It's sort of like the bulge in 1944. You could talk about what would happen if you didn't win it, but frankly, it wasn't that useful in the middle of the battle. So I just want to say that myself, just as a comment, And we should go to Carlos, I think is the next one. Yeah, there he is.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we're able to see you.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yes, you're good.
Would
You're good. Go
would
ahead.
like to thank the Schiller Institute and also the panelists for being here today. It's an honor to do that. I do have a few questions to ask. The first one being is that in terms of the complexity of the election fraud, is there any risk that it is so messy at this point? Does it really, with going to the Supreme Court with all the allegations, there's several out there that the Supreme Court does not is willing to even take this issue up? Is there a risk there? The second part of that is that what is the precedent that's been established in the past in regards to the Supreme Court's involvement in this situation? The second part of that question, and the final question is that what are the guarantees that a Trump administration reelection is going to evolve into the multipolar world at this point when we've seen a selection of individuals like Pompeo, others that have been rejecting that for the most part? I think that's a very legitimate question as to what's the assurances that the America First pivot into a multipolar world that the Schiller Institute, the LaRouche PAC has really been advocating for the United States joining the One Belt, One Road projects and so forth. So I know that's quite a bit to chew on, but I appreciate the time to ask those questions.
Okay, great. I think Kirk wants to go first, and then Jim wants to go, from what I can determine. And anybody else
Yeah,
can get it?
I'd like point 3 when we get to that.
Okay. Kirk, you're muted. You're muted.
How's that?
Yeah, works.
Okay. All right. I'll take the first part of that question because I had already written it down as an extension of what Jim had spoken about earlier, these various scenarios that we're confronted with. We're not quite sure how this will play out, but I do believe this. This whole attack on our election system, with all of the kinds of attacks, it's multifaceted, is a lot like a denial of service attack in ITEs, if you will, the way we talk about how an enemy, an adversary shuts down a server that provides a service on the internet. And that is, you hit it so many times with pings and requests that the system shuts down. It just is an overflow of activity and it can't keep up with it. And it's common. Everyone here has probably heard of a denial of service attack. Think of this multifaceted attack on the election system the same way. It was done on a massive scale using different types of election fraud to overwhelm us, overwhelm the states, overwhelm the state legislatures, overwhelm the availability of lawyers who are honest enough to take this on in the numbers, to take on the scale of it all. Now, people say, well, it'll go to the Supreme Court. Well, you know, the Supreme Court is probably not going to vote on which candidate won. It may make legal rulings that result in the naming of someone. But if the timeline between now and December 14th, when the Electoral College must take action, if it is still so muddled where the states say, we're not ready, the Constitution, thank God, has provided a mechanism that kicks in. And that is the election goes to the House of Representatives. And each state provides one vote. Now, thank goodness, thank Providence, that 28 to 31, I'm not sure which it is. The 28 number might be more accurate because the victories the GOP has accrued through this election won't probably be in effect yet. But the GOP owns 28 of the 50 states, which means when Pelosi gavels it in and asks for that roll call, it's going to be a sad day for Nancy Pelosi because the votes are with Trump and he would emerge as president. Just wanted to add that in there.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim and Ben, if anyone else wants to know, we're going to answer, let me know. But Jim, are you there? I don't see him.
Are you asking for Joe?
No, I'm asking for Jim Jatras at the moment.
Oh, Jim Jatras.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
He
sorry.
was gonna-
Okay.
he had- yeah, he did. Okay, Jim,
Sorry
you're
about
back. We
that.
had lost you. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, we continue with the question, or am I answering the third point?
You're doing the third part now.
What guarantee do we have that we will see if Trump does manage to stay in, that we'll move toward a multipolar order? People have been predicting the rise of a multipolar order for some time, and unfortunately, the establishment in the unipolar capital hasn't gotten the memo yet. That they still keep pressing against Russia and China, but also Iran, Venezuela, and other countries, despite the genuine fear that at least some people have that this is moving us closer to a global conflict. And that unfortunately has not changed under Trump, partly because his appointees have been so uniformly bad. Now, so I would say there's no guarantee. On the other hand, there is at least still a hope. The fact that Esper has gotten fired now, there's talk about maybe Gina Haspel will be shown the door. A little late in the day to be doing that. It should have been done a long time ago, and I don't know if the replacements will be any better. But at least, and this can't be emphasized too much, Trump has not started a new war during his time in office, and that's a pretty low bar to clear to what we expect from a president. But that at least is head and shoulders above what we've seen in recent decades. My hope is that in a second term, he will feel more empowered to actually make some of the changes that he promised during the 2016 campaign. The fact that people like Boris Johnson and Angela Merkel and Bibi Netanyahu and Crown Prince Salman rushed so quickly to greet Biden's election, I hope maybe would open his eyes a bit about some of these people. If he does get a second term, will start feeling he has nothing to lose to move more forcefully in the right direction. So I at least have some hope, no matter how embattled he would certainly be in the second term, that he might do that. And that compares to really no hope at all if Biden and Kamala Harris take the helm, where they will simply be a passive conduit for the worst tendencies of the warfare state and the bipartisan liberal interventionist neoconservative Republican establishment. That it'll be I don't think there will be any counterbalancing impulse from the president himself, which we at least see, I think, in this administration.
Okay, very good. I think. Thank you. So I think we'll go to the next person, but I can do this while you're beginning to switch, because it was a question from Moritz, who was originally supposed to be in the line. He had to get going. This was for you, Helga, I believe. What connections are there between, and others might have an insight, what connections are there between the American deep state and the German European elites? Who is particularly influential here in Europe to promote a transatlantic deep state? Can you name names? And they asked about Klaus. He asked about Klaus Schwab. That was the question. So I guess that's in your court, Helga.
Well, I'm afraid that all the people who were deeply shocked when Trump got elected in 2016, you just make a list. Then you go by the British project of the Integrity Initiative. These are the cluster agents British intelligence has groomed in every country. We can publish this list again on our website. You look at the people who come out like tin soldiers, with the line of attacking Trump. I think it's very easy. You know, it's the Commonwealth, it's the Five Eyes, which they want now to extend to Seven Eyes. I think that the collusion, you know, about the different secret services of these countries is pretty obvious, you know, because when it came out that Merkel's smartphone was surveyed, she said among friends, this doesn't go at all, but who has talked about it ever since? So I think that the revelations by Kirk Wiebe and Mr. Binney and Colonel Black and so forth, this is an issue which needs to urgently be brought into the parliaments in Europe. And, you know, I think that we can make a very long list of people who belong to the, you know, what you would call the deep state or the transatlantic military industrial complex. I mean, this is very dangerous. And I can only repeat that there were just maneuvers, I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, where the German Air Force trained with the Americans to upload nuclear weapons flying against Russia. Now, that is really forbidden according to the German Grundgesetz, you know, but they're doing it anyway. And this whole modernization of nuclear weapons, which are supposed to be increased in Europe, if there is a war, you know, Europe will be the battlefield. And while you had, you know, it's basically coming to a situation like in the beginning of the 80s, where you had the Pershing II SS-20 launch on warning. Everybody knew we are 3 minutes away from nuclear war if there's any mistake. I think we are in a much more dangerous situation, except the people are sleeping, and the danger of sleepwalking into World War III is bigger than ever before.
Okay, very good. Let's go to Sonia. Waiting.
Yeah, she was here on video and now is here on audio, but maybe having that same trouble unmuting. I'm trying to.
Okay. While we're waiting for her that to get straightened out, let me just announce that the Schiller Institute will be doing a virtual conference on December 12th and 13th. There'll be more information about that at the close of this, but we just want people to know about it now. It's, in other words, in just over 4 weeks. And it will be occurring just before the December 14th date that was stated earlier. Okay, how are we doing now?
No, I don't think it's working. Oh, wait, she's there. She's there. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, fine. Sonia, try speaking. Let's see if we can hear you.
Okay, just a minute. Just my camera went down, so. Okay. Can you see me?
Oh, we can see you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah.
For everybody who doesn't know me, my name is Sonja van den Ende. I'm originally from the Netherlands, but living in Germany. I'm an independent journalist. I'm writing a lot about the Middle East, Ukraine, and so on, Russia. My first question is has there been legal cases already against the fraud from the voting? Has it started already? And furthermore, there was...
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Furthermore, there was a lady, Sarah Westphal. She talked about the World Economic Forum. And a lot of people in Europe are also very wary about this. And we see a lot of demonstrations going on against Corona and so on. But actually, how soon do you think, or what is known in the United States about these plans? Will it be implemented very soon, this Agenda 2021, 2030? That's what I wanted to ask right now. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody want to take it? Harley, how about you?
Yeah. Hi, Sonia. How are you?
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Some of these plans are already in effect. If you go back the beginning was Henry Kissinger's National Security Study Memo 2000 or 200, which called for the reduction of population in, I think, 13 nations, all of which were developing sector nations. This has been on the agenda for a long time. It wasn't invented by the billionaires at Davos. It goes back to the Club of Rome. It goes back to the whole creation of the environmentalist movement. And in fact, if you take it back further, it goes back to Parson Malthus and the British Empire's fight against the American Revolution. Now, part of the problem is that people get confused when they're talking about the World Economic Forum, where they think that people like Fauci and Gates are the ones who are dictating the policy. Now, they may be operating on behalf of these interests. Gates, especially, we know, has a long history of population reduction as part of his policy. But these agendas have been there. We see them implemented through International Monetary Fund conditionalities. We see them implemented through the World Bank, shutting down development programs everywhere. You know, one of the most best examples of this is the Trans-Aqua project, which we've been fighting for years for the Lake Chad area, where if it's not reversed soon, you're going to have 30 million more refugees and many, many more people starving because of the drying up of this lake. There was a plan on the books from the 1970s, and it was rejected by the World Bank, rejected by the IMF, and it's still rejected today. So what we're seeing with the World Economic Forum is another branch of these globalist financial interests intertwined with corporate cartels, big pharma, and so on, that are moving, as Helga was identifying, to a new financial system of a global digitalized currency, which will simply mean that all policy, all determination of economic policy, not just credit policy, which is currently already in their hands, but all economic policy will be in the hands of this supranational institution of a coordinated effort from central banks who will be acting on behalf of the private banks. Now, what does that mean? That means, and this is why the vote fraud fight is so important. If you have such an institution or institutions that are making policy, in which you have technocrats determining what is the economic policy of a nation, not legislatures, then what's the point of voting for a legislature? You lose every power you have of institutions of self-government, of representative government. That's what they're talking about taking away. And the use of vote fraud to bring Biden in the United States is simply a part of that. So to answer your question, these policies are already in place. That's why there are 7 million people who have starved to death this year. That's why 30 million more are threatened, because these powerful institutions have decreed there shall be no credit. And then what happens? You have China with the Belt and Road Initiative creating new alternatives. You have a potential for a new financial system, a new Bretton Woods. And that's the enemy, as seen by the World Economic Forum at Davos and others. So look, our job is to get people to understand that the misery in which they live today, whether it's the lockdown or before the lockdown, people who work 2 or 3 jobs and still can't afford health care, can't afford college, can't afford housing. This is all because of the transformation of the world economy under the policies of these banksters, these gangsters. And that has to end. Now, whether or not President Trump will do it depends in part on whether all these people who are affected by it are in the street mobilizing to make sure that Biden doesn't get in. If we overturn this apparatus, then it becomes very clear that this is the same apparatus that's imposing these zero growth policies. And let me just make one quick point. Biden is bringing onto his coronavirus task force Ezekiel Emanuel, the man who was the author of the death panel policy of Obamacare in the first place, who developed these quality adjusted life years as a method of determining whether people should stay alive or not. And I think Jim mentioned this before, the idea that after you're 75, you really don't have a right to live anymore, according to Emmanuel. That's the person Biden intends to oversee his healthcare policy. So that's the Agenda 2030. That's all these population reduction policies that coming into the new administration.
Unfortunately for Biden, he also may be assigning him to oversee his own healthcare. So, the next three we have are Cara, Kelly, and Enrique. All right, so we're going to go in that order, and I believe that's going to bring us to the conclusion, unless someone else gets frisky. So, can we go to Cara now?
Do you hear me? Could you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
My question again, I'm because I missed a little bit of the middle because something happened with my stream. But for Mr. Wiebe, like, does Donald Trump or any of his team, how aware are they of the software, and how easy or hard is it to prove any type of use of it to tamper with this election?
Unmute. You're muted.
Oh, am I muted?
Okay. No, I was Cara. They are very aware. The challenge is this. The equipment we want to get our hands on, the lawyers, the investigators, is still in the hands of those who don't want us to have it. And so computers can be scrubbed clean, wiped. My fear is if the FBI doesn't come in with a search warrant, grab the computers, copy the hard drives of any computer device, whether it's a vote tabulation machine, a counting machine, the actual voting machines, all of that data needs to be copied before it's destroyed. I have no doubt that the people who have orchestrated this fraud would be very willing to do that. They've been willing to commit fraud. This would be just another step. And so, and they would explain it that it was a glitch or it was unintentional. We are in a bloodless coup right now. And so we can't trust anything or anyone. Do I think we're aware? Yeah. But it's a very dicey process trying to get your hands on the equipment that may contain the proof that we're all seeking. That said, we have lots of opportunities because it looks like this type of fraud was committed on a grand scale. So the irony of this is that those people who are opposed to our democratic process may have actually sowed the roots of their own demise, because there's lots of opportunity to discover the fraud.
Where
That's
is
the good
that
thing.
information stored? Like, is that
Okay, very good. Jim has something to say. Go ahead.
Yes, just a quick footnote to that. I agree with that entirely, and that's where all of us should be worried, because not only are these people in a position where they're going to be busily destroying evidence until it's seized, I'm not sure how much we can really trust the FBI either to move or to do what they're supposed to do. I don't trust Director Wray on these matters, and we've seen the politicization of elements of the FBI against Trump throughout the time that he has been president. So we all know what needs to be done, and I think it was described very well what needs to be done. The question is, can that be done, and done promptly enough to prevent the destruction of that evidence? And can you trust the agencies that are tasked with doing these things?
Okay, very good. So can we go to Kelly?
It's me. I'm up right now. Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right.
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, all right. I'm Kelly Mordecai. I'm with Watch the Vote USA. We are a national election integrity and an election transparency group. And the first thing I want to communicate is thank you, and thank you again for having this panel. In Watch the Vote, we got together in 2011, and we were instrumental in flipping the Iowa caucus to the true winner of Rick Santorum. And the Ron Paul campaign, we noticed in North Carolina, even NPR reported a electronic flip that Ron Paul's votes went to Mitt Romney. We did a survey, Watch the Vote did a survey in 2016, and the comments were rather frightening, exposing how many people were taking advantage, taking advantage of the vulnerabilities of the electronic system. I'm coming to a question here. And anyway, we sent a Watch Vote sent a report to Trump's Commission on Elections. And I know it's not easy to handle this, but there are many vulnerabilities of our electronic election system. I'm an engineer. I've actually programmed in 5 computer programming languages. And one of the challenges I'm having, I mean, even more recently, we saw what happened in Antrim County in Michigan, and 6,000 votes. I mean, this was on Sean Hannity on Friday night. And the RNC chair, Ronna McDaniel, and the Michigan chair, Ms. Cox, were with Hannity reporting that 6,000 votes got electronically flipped. That video, you can watch that, Hannity. It's in the comments. Anyway, these vulnerabilities have existed, and the GOP in Michigan is catching them. Hopefully, Georgia will count them too. They were blaming the Dominion election system. And of course, there's always the counter argument of the secretaries of state. And she posted on her website, Secretary of State of Michigan. She stated in writing, let me find it quick. Yeah, Jocelyn Benson, the SOS of Michigan, on their website over this Antrim County issue. She stated the software did not cause a misallocation of votes. It was a result of human user error. Even when human error occurs, it is caught during counting canvases. Now, did you hear what the Secretary of State Benson was saying? What she's saying is humans have access to the machines for software, quote unquote, software upgrades. And other research I've indicated too, there is access. Well, humans can actually commit an error, or they can tamper and claim it was an error, a snafu, a glitch, whatever you want to call it, but humans have access. That's a concern. That's where all these vulnerabilities are created. Monday before the election, I walked right up to a vote counting machine with Officer Wittach. He's a police officer, and I explained to him the vulnerabilities. Anyway, in Siskiyou County, California, where I live, we have the Dominion system, same as in Antrim, Michigan. I've been expressing this for years to our county supervisors and election clerks. I guess I don't have enough gray hair to get through. My question is, would one of or two or three on this panel today, would they be willing to have a Zoom call with my county supervisors? I don't have enough gray hair that they're listening. Are one of you available for this, or two or three? Because the vulnerabilities are there. It is very hard to prove election fraud, not impossible, but it's easy to prove the vulnerabilities. If you're a computer programmer, you get this. For example, in the DEF CON, it's a national conference in Vegas in August every year, DEF CON Hackers Conference. They've done it at least 3. I'm sure they did it this year. It's not it's not if you can hack these machines, it's how fast. They have this thing called the hacker's tent. Okay? It's not if, it's how fast. And then you go to election clerks and, well, you need physical access. I proved that on Monday, walking right up to the machine. Anyway, would someone with more gray hair than me be willing to come and talk to my supervisors?
One of those people has put their hand up, so let's see. Go ahead. Go ahead, Kirk.
Yeah, I'm willing to help you. I'm willing. Am I on?
Yes.
Yeah, I hear
yes.
you.
Yeah. All right. Kirk Wiebe is willing to help you. I don't think we'll succeed, though. I'll tell you why. Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe sent out to every Secretary of State in the country that's in charge of elections a very brief one-page paper saying that we would help them, advise them, talk to them about this very issue you're talking about. We did not hear back from one. This was 2 months ago, 3 months ago. Not one responded. Now, my belief is the state legislatures are going to have to order a complete overhaul of the election process. I would tell you that I, along with Bill Binney and a very smart guy, have begun to innovate what an ideal voting system, electronic voting system would look like. The first thing we need to do is throw out this arcane mentality that we're in, that voting has to happen on Microsoft Windows computers. It doesn't. It doesn't. But the states have to budget and pay attention to and get serious about revamping this system. Or we're going to just see repeats of this again and again and again. And they don't have a lot of time. So short answer, yes, I'll help you. My expectations are not great. So I am open to a discussion to help convince some people to rethink this whole thing.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we go to Enrique at this point?
That is awesome.
We're not able to get the audio.
Yeah, I would also help if Colonel Black was willing to come on too. That would. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
hello?
well, excuse me. Great. We answered your question. We're having a problem with your audio, but we want to just go to the next person. And if you just get in touch with us, you're already in touch with us. So, Enrique, is that you? Hello?
Your audio is muted, Enrique.
Buenas tardes. ¿Me escuchan? Bien. Buenas tardes a todos. Me honra poder... Sí. Bien. Buenas tardes a todos. Me honra poder participar de este panel. Soy Enrique Vox, hablo desde Buenos Aires, Argentina. Les pido disculpas por la digresión porque aquí se está hablando principalmente del fraude, pero también de comunicación. Entonces, mi pregunta es, ¿por qué creen que el presidente Donald Trump y su estructura social, política y económica que lo respaldan no generaron una estructura comunicacional favorable para poder enfrentar a la prensa hegemónica y cartelizada?
Should we get a translator?
Okay, very good. Jim, you want to take that? Yeah, we got it. We got the question.
I'll defer to Colonel Black, but the answer is it's a damn good question. Why doesn't he have that? Why hasn't that been a priority to create that during the last 4 years instead of relying on Fox News, which has now turned around to bite him? So it's yeah, I mean, there are many things he should have done during these past 4 years. It should have been evident to him he was completely under siege from the establishment that he was nominally the head of, that he did not have fully control over and needed to create these mechanisms and did not. So that's all I would have to say. I'll defer to Colonel Black now.
Okay, Colonel Black, you have something to add?
You really need to comprehend the enormity of the media. The media is a pyramid. It begins with a signal that is sent down and it goes throughout the world. Depending on the priority of the issue, whether it's something enormously high priority, like creating hysteria over COVID, or whether it is undermining the Trump administration, the power that is exerted by the broadcast media is just astounding. And we have fortunately been able to sort of get a foot in the door through social media, which has given us the ability to convey from one another what's going on. It's not nearly as powerful or as effective as the broadcast media, which the broadcast media goes to the casual listener, the person who really doesn't have the time to research or understand issues, and they simply want to be told what to believe, and they go out and they believe it. People like you and I do our research. We are not willing to accept the commonly accepted beliefs. We question, we look for facts, and but President Trump has probably kicked back harder against the global media than any president in recollection. There's an old saying: you don't fight with people who have buckets of printer's ink. And President Trump has had the courage to fight against exactly those people. And of course, it has not made him any friends within the news media, but it's very powerful. And I think we simply have to work with what we have. Right at this point, what we have is social media. It has not been completely censored at this point, and so it's a very valuable tool, and we need to use that to try to undermine the results of this fraudulent election and attempt to rectify the situation. I can't say we can, but I think that we need to try and certainly go down fighting.
Okay. Very good. So I think that is basically all the questions. So what I'd like to do is go to concluding statements or observations, if anybody has any. I know we hadn't taken much time for crosstalk, but that's mainly because we had so many people in the queue. So I think, let me go first to Jim Jatras and ask you if there's anything you haven't said or you think should be emphasized at this point.
No, I don't think so, other than the fact that I don't think we should be deterministic about this, in the sense that something is written in stone in the future and is not amenable to our actions. This is really a call to action for the American people, that this is not just a question of winning or losing an election. It's not just partisan Republicans against Democrats. This is a fundamental corruption of what's left of a constitutional order that's been breaking down for several decades now. And if this theft works, that I don't know how much coming back there will be for the future. I'm not sure that election reforms or balloting reforms or shutting the barn door after the horse is gone is really going to do us much good. That we will see very, very firm steps taken in the next few years to foreclose the possibility. Look, the establishment did not expect the surprise they got in 2016. If this fraud succeeds, it's because they were expecting Trump to possibly win. In fact, I think did win, and they had every trick in the book lined up to make sure that wouldn't happen. We're not getting caught flat-footed the way they did in 2016, and they're going to take a lot of steps. And when I say they, I don't mean just the Democrats. I mean the establishment of the Republican Party. I think we're going to see a purge of populism, of conservatism, of just old-fashioned American values like we've never seen in the history of this country before, from social media, kind of a woke ideological test that everybody's going to have to pass to stay employed, to go to school, to have utilities, to have a bank account. I think it really will be the end of a free society as we thought we've known it for so many years. So let's not kid ourselves. This is for all the marbles. Just saying, oh well, there's always next year. There's 2024. I think that would be kidding ourselves. That we have to not just go down fighting, but do everything possible to ensure that if victory is possible, that it is attained.
Okay, very good. Colonel Black.
Well, I certainly agree with Jim. I have not a great deal of optimism about the direction that the nation is headed. There was serious talk about a military coup. I think we managed to shine enough sunlight on that to kill that off. But it shows the seriousness with which these people are willing to take on the remnants of freedom of this country. We face a very serious situation. I personally sense the aroma of the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, the things, the violent takeover of Cuba, of Pol Pot in Cambodia, things of that sort. I think revolution is in the air. We're seeing our children being indoctrinated in schools in what they call critical race theory, which is simply a hate-filled, racist program beyond anything that we have ever imagined in this country. We have never seen racism like we are encountering now in our public schools, and it's expanding. It's going into our universities. The thin line of freedom is crumbling in many places. I certainly agree with Jim Jatras that the results of a Biden presidency will be very negative. It will be a Kamala Harris presidency, and she is a communist. I think there's little doubt that is her philosophy, and so I think we face very difficult times, and we need to do everything possible to prevail in the election. However, if we don't prevail in the election, it is up to us, the faithful remnant, to continue to fight on, and I expect personally to do it. So we'll see in this battle, and if something does not, if we don't prevail, then we need to be prepared to fight the next battle too.
Okay, very good. Harley?
Well, let me sound a note of optimism in contrast to what we've just heard. That's not to say that it's not realistic what Colonel Black and what Jim pointed out. We're facing a very evil force with a lot of power. And there has been a brainwashing of much of the population. But what just happened? If we're right about the vote, the majority of the people voted for Trump and against Biden. They're just not organized on the level that's necessary to win. But beyond the situation in the United States, what are we looking at worldwide? The Trump vote occurred after Brexit. It occurred as we saw the establishment parties in Germany, in Italy, in virtually every country in Europe, shredded, defeated, because the establishment doesn't have answers. So in the words of Percy Shelley, we are many. We actually have a capability of building majorities around the world so that you have sovereign nations joining together in a community of interest, of principle, against the bankers and against these plans for global dictatorship. The question then is organization. The question is getting across the ideas, the leadership that will take these ideas, the profound ideas, for example, of Lyndon LaRouche on economic policy, and fight for them and win that battle at least with a minority of the people who were in motion. And that's the idea of the Gideon's army. So I think in this, what otherwise is a very dark moment, of course, Biden is saying we're in a dark winter. When winter comes, can spring be far behind? We have to be the leadership that will take this fight and win it. And it starts with the fight against the vote fraud.
Okay, very good. Kirk Wiebe, you seem to be talking on the phone. You're next.
Yes, I just took a phone call. Okay. I cannot do better than what I just heard Colonel Black, Jim Jatras, Harley, and Helga say. So let me just direct you to a tweet I just saw about 20 minutes ago that just hit me. And you know, when you see things that hit you that hard, they're worth preserving and sharing with others. I want to direct your attention to a tweet put out by Dinesh D'Souza. Is that his last name?
D'Souza.
Yeah, D'Souza. It's a video that some hero in a voting facility, a ballot counting facility, took privately of a person grabbing a ballot, showing that it's for Trump, and tearing it in half and throwing it over his shoulder, and grabbing another one, ripping it and throwing it over his shoulder. That should be one of our poster childs. People are eager to know, are we aware of things? My God, if that kind of thing is happening, everything else is happening. And so maybe I can find it again and share it with LaRouche and you can put it out there. But be aware, it's an illustration of just what we're facing. This is in your face, abject corruption and criminal behavior. They're willing to do it. It depicts the seriousness. This isn't a friendly fight between two opposing teams. That is destructive, and they are hell bent on achieving their goal.
Okay, very good. So Helga?
Well, I think that unfortunately I have to agree that the dangers are incredible. And, you know, I mean, the more you study the strategic situation, the danger of a meltdown of the financial system, the danger of famine, of biblical dimensions, as Beasley is emphasizing, the danger of nuclear war. And I think that that danger is not in the perception of many people as present as it should be, because if we ever get to World War III, there will be no historian to report about it, because in all likelihood, it will be the annihilation of the human species. So I don't know what could be a bigger danger than, and I could add the cultural depravity, I could add a lot of things, but I think we have never been in such a civilizational crisis like now. Am I optimistic or pessimistic? Well, I mean, the Schiller Institute is called Schiller Institute because Friedrich Schiller was probably the most optimistic person. He was a realist. He saw the dangers of his time. He knew the oligarchy like no other person of his period. All his dramas were the battles against oligarchy. This is why people should study his dramas. But he also said man is greater than his destiny, because man is a person of free will, of the power of imagination, of the capacity to develop a vision of the future. And in the beginning of his story about the separation of the Netherlands from Spain, he wrote this very beautiful introduction. He said, the reason why I'm telling you this story is to give in my readers, to evoke in my readers a beautiful feeling of their power, what they can accomplish if they unite for a good plan. And, I think that is what the spirit is with which we should go out. We should tell people how incredibly dangerous it is, but we should also convey to them that we absolutely can win this battle if we act together for a good plan. And that is what we should go by.
All right. So I want to thank Kirk Wiebe, Jim Jatras, Colonel Black, Arlie Schlanger, and Helga Zepp-LaRouche for being with us today. I want to just say a few words about the upcoming conference that the Schiller Institute will be having on December 12th and 13th in this context. December 16th will be the 250th anniversary of the birth of Ludwig van Beethoven. And we have used throughout our history of the Schiller Institute the slogan, "Think like Beethoven." Well, Beethoven thought that Schiller was the greatest poet that had lived. And he set his Ode to Joy over a period of 30 years, saying that he had to come up with something which would allow that poem to be properly seen for what it was. Of course, that poem and that symphony, the Ninth Symphony, has been used and is the hallmark of freedom all over the world. Of course, back in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, and even the process leading up to the fall of the wall and after, that was heard all over both Germany, but also all over the world. It's something important, I think, to think about, because Beethoven also is reputed to have said, if people were to understand my music, there would be no more war. The so-called civil war that is about to operate in the United States may erupt in the United States, not a civil war, nor as the earlier 1861 to 65 war was not a civil war. There was a rebellion. It was a rebellion, a bunch of people who decided to declare their independence from the American Republic. And the way that Lincoln always dealt with them is he never used that term. He did use it in the Gettysburg Address, but he never allowed that to be a legal characterization of the war. He recognized that it was a manipulation from outside of the United States, specifically by Great Britain and by France. And he fought that war internationally. His ambassador to Russia, Cassius Marcellus Clay, created an alliance with Alexander II of Russia, who of course used his navy to defend the United States from the Confederacy, both in New York and California. He had other representatives that represented him in different parts of the world, to China, to Thailand, and other places. It was a global conflict. And most importantly, his Transcontinental Railroad, which was begun as soon as he came into office, was his way of creating a new form of capability that had never existed in the world, unifying a continent and conquering the interior of that continent. He had sent an ambassador, Anson Burlingame, to a China still subjugated by the British under the Opium War. And I'd like to just say, concerning this issue of the Transcontinental Railroad, that is what the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative takes as its historical precedent. Where we are tonight in America, and the issue of winning the war in America, is winning a war with the self. The problem that we have is that people are attempting to assert that they are axiomatically incapable of implementing the Declaration of Independence. There is no reason for a so-called street revolution against the Constitution, because the United States itself is a revolutionary nation. The Constitution and Declaration of Independence make it inherently revolutionary. And that's not the revolution in the street. That's the revolution to support and defend the presidency of the United States. Lyndon LaRouche, the late Lyndon LaRouche, designed something called the Manhattan Project to allow America to come back to this idea of a unified presidency, the presidency of Alexander Hamilton and George Washington being that president. And of course, that presidency was in New York. What we're talking about today here, what we've been able to do here today, specifically because of what we've allowed you to be presented with, gives you the tools to defy the so-called destiny, which is only the destiny of the oppressed. The situation we are in is one in which, if we act with an act of conscience, we will prevail. I'm caused to think of St. Augustine's Confessions, because the issue involved for the United States is confess the fact that the Anglo-American establishment, the City of London's British intelligence, has run you. It runs you axiomatically. Americans like to say very arrogantly that they aren't run by that, or that they understand that. But it's their very arrogance in thinking about it that way, instead of thinking about the world as the ally of the United States, which is what Abraham Lincoln understood and Franklin Roosevelt understood. It's that and only that. By changing that perspective, changing that point of view, then we will prevail. And I will just point out that neither Russia nor China nor Mexico has recognized Joseph Biden as the president of the United States. They have stated that, in fact, they will recognize whomever is duly accorded the privilege of representing the people of the United States, basically, essentially on December 14th. Our conference will happen the days before, just the days before. We invite everybody to attend that, be involved in that, and so forth. But we just want to leave you with this thought. If it were the case that the American people were to confess their sins, the sin of omission of thinking about the whole human race and thinking about what has been done in their name to many people throughout the planet by destroying elections, destroying governments, and so on, and recognize that, yes, that is not their nature. It is not the nature of their government, but it is the nature of the usurper who wishes to take their own government now directly from them in the form of this process that has been described by Kirk Wiebe in its various multifacets. If they confess that, then they will defeat it. You can only defeat this by lifting yourself above the mud of your own axioms and think about the whole world. And from that standpoint, this presidency will prevail as it ought to. And therefore, the crime that is being committed can be seen, exposed, and defeated. So on behalf of the Schiller Institute, I want to thank everybody for joining us here today. I'm Dennis Speed, and we will see you hopefully at our conference on December 12th and 13th. You can get in touch with us and our organizers, and you can further get portions of this as well as the entirety shortly. Please take it out. Please start organizing, and let's win the presidency of the United States and the American Declaration of Independence and Constitution back.
Ok. Bien, bien. Muchas gracias, ¿eh? Hasta luego. Ok. Estuvo todo muy bien. Un abrazo grande.